Well, it was an interesting year for the Baltimore Ravens, to say the very least. Lots of good feeling and goodwill for the Ravens organization, from their fans after winning the Super Bowl to cap off the 2012 season. And it was a surprising Super Bowl win, but a Super Bowl win nonetheless. That's the second one in the history of the Baltimore Ravens organization. You ever wonder what the people of Cleveland think about seeing their old Browns team winning Super Bowls in another city? Hmm. Maybe you should have given Modell that stadium back in the mid 90s, and these could have possibly been your Super Bowl championships. Just a thought. But for the 2013 season, there were some expectations that the Ravens weren't going to be as good, and understandably so. They had a lot of losses, and especially the defensive side of the football. Ray Lewis retired. Ed Reed went elsewhere. They lose Paul Kruger via free agency. There were some Kerry Williams leaves via free agency. There were some big time losses on the defensive side of the football. And you looked at it. They gave Flacco a ton of money in the offseason, clearly putting their stamp on him that he is their guy, no doubt about it. And they really had no other choice but to do that, since he had come alive in the playoffs, played as well as he did in the playoffs, and ultimately led him to a Super Bowl. And when you look at it, when all is said and done, this 2013 season, the Ravens had a chance to make the playoffs. They were 8-6, and it was pretty much one of those win and you're in type of scenarios the last 2 weeks. They had to win one of their last two. Unfortunately, their last two games were against two playoff teams in New England and Cincinnati, and they ended up losing to those two teams by a combined score of 75 to 24, 41 to 7, 34 to 17. Ouchies. Not good. Not good when you're fighting for your playoff lives. Not good when you basically have a chance to just win one of your last two games and make the playoffs. And you fall flat on your face, you finish 8-8, and you miss the playoffs. You have nobody to blame ultimately but yourselves. Now, another problem for the Ravens this year, and a real reason, besides those last two games and those choke jobs there where they just flat out didn't show up on both the offensive and defensive side of the football, is the fact that when you look at it, they lost to some bad teams this year, some non playoff teams. They lost to Buffalo, they lost to Pittsburgh, they lost to Cleveland, they lost to Chicago. Those are teams right there. If the Ravens just find a way to beat Buffalo or beat Chicago or beat Cleveland, they're in the playoffs. And the last two games of the season, frankly, probably really wouldn't have mattered, but it wasn't to be. And when you look at it, a lot of the Ravens' troubles were on the offensive side of the ball because defensively they came together and they ended up being a pretty good unit. They finished 12th overall in points allowed, 9th overall in yards allowed. They were kind of middle of the road in terms of sacks, but this was still a good, solid Ravens defense. Surprised me a little bit. I thought they were going to be a little worse for wear with some of the pieces that they lost, but they plugged in some people and they still played solid, good defense, except the last 2 weeks of the season, of course, and maybe the opening game of the year against Peyton Manning and the Broncos when he went off on them for 7 touchdowns. With all that said, though, ultimately the troubles for the Ravens came on the offensive side of the football. And of course, the person that is going to get the most blame, and understandably so, in some ways rightfully so, because he deserves a good portion of it, is Joe Flacco. He's the one that they gave all that guaranteed money to in the offseason. He's the one that they gave that big contract to. And he had another year where he didn't throw for 4,000 yards. And this year, he had 19 touchdown passes and 22 interceptions. Not good. Not good. Flacco's decision making at times was brutal. His ability to make plays at times was terrible. But he is also not the only person to blame. He is not the only reason to look at this Ravens team and say why they didn't make the playoffs, because it's deeper than that. It always is deeper than that. Quarterbacks, when teams win, get way too much credit. When they lose, get way too little blame in a lot of cases. See somebody like a Peyton Manning or a Tom Brady or a Drew Brees, et cetera, et cetera. But when you look at Flacco, it is much deeper than just the quarterback position. You look at it, they traded away his most consistent, reliable possession receiver in Anquan Bolden to the 49ers for a sixth-round pick. I don't give a damn who you are. You lose your best weapon on offense for a sixth-round pick and don't adequately replace that individual, you're going to struggle a little bit in the passing game. And when you pair that with the offensive line's inability to run block most of the year and provide solid pass protection most of the year, it's not surprising to see that the Ravens struggled. They gave up 48 sacks. Flacco was sacked 48 times this year. That's not good. Yes, when they made the trade for Eugene Monroe in midseason, that did help stabilize and improve that offensive line unit a little bit. But I emphasize again, a little bit. They still weren't that good. And Ray Rice in particular wasn't that good. 3.1 yards a carry. Ugh. like 600 something rushing yards. Ray Rice looked done in 2013. Done, and completely done. So here you also have Dennis Pitta, who missed the majority of the year as the top tight end for the Ravens due to injury. So here's what you got. He lost his best receiver in Anquan Bolden. His best tight end was gone most of the year in Dennis Pitta. And his best running back, Ray Rice, a big part of that Ravens offense, struggled mightily in 2013. So Flacco, as a result, tried to, at times, and he had to, take more of the responsibility that maybe he should have and tried to make plays when there weren't plays to be made and had a terrible year. So it was an entirely whole encompassing thing. Torrey Smith had a good season, went over 1,100 receiving yards, so there's still some positives there. But the bottom line is, coming into this offseason, the Ravens have to, with Flacco being their big money quarterback, they have to do a better job of protecting him, and they have to do a better job of giving him more weapons to work with in the passing game. Depending on how the coin flip goes, the Ravens are either going to be picking 16th or 17th in the first round. And they'll have other picks throughout that primarily need to be devoted to the offensive side of the football. We'll see whether or not they retain Eugene Monroe. I have a feeling that they might, but Michael Orr might be allowed to go in free agency. And even if he was allowed to stay, you still need to address the interior of that offensive line and maybe even find a replacement for Michael Orr at right tackle. And the wide receiving core, they need somebody other than Torrey Smith. If you're relying upon Marlon Brown and Tandon Doss and Jacoby Jones to get it done, you're going to struggle. They need a big-time physical wide receiver, a pure complement to Torrey Smith that can be a credible red zone target for Joe Flacco to throw to. Dennis Pitt is a free agent. He's already 28. Are you really going to franchise him? Could you potentially use another tight end or maybe a replacement for Dennis Pitt to get younger at that position? You might need to replace Ray Rice at running back. Is Barnard Pierce really going to be the guy that gets the job done? Or are you going to have to address that? These are all positions that at some point in time in this draft, the Baltimore Ravens are going to have to address early and often. Offensive line, wide receiver, tight end, running back. All of it needs to be addressed. Joe Flacco is your franchise piece now. He is your franchise guy because of the money you've given him, as a Ravens organization. As a result, you must position him in a way to take as much pressure off of him as possible and give him the most possible chances to succeed. If the Baltimore Ravens in 2014 primarily tried out the exact same offensive weapons and offensive line that they had in 2013, Flacco's going to struggle again and the Ravens are going to miss the playoffs again. And it's really that simple.